I defeated a 13 feet tall Gladiatrix alien, and now she says I must breed strong offspring with her. Welcome to the world of science fiction. Comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Lucas Kane had no intention of stepping into the ring that night. He had come to Core 5 looking for work, maybe some quick credits escorting a cargo freighter or running security for one of the many warlords that carved the planet into their own lawless territories. He hadn't expected to find himself in the heart of an underground coliseum, surrounded by thousands of roaring alien spectators, each one eager to watch blood spill on the sand. Yet there he stood, fists clenched, muscles coiled, staring up at the towering figure across from him. Tessara, the reigning Gladiatrix champion, a beast of a woman standing 13 feet tall, her crimson skin glistening under the arena lights. Every inch of her body was carved with muscle and battle scars that pulsed faintly with energy. She was more than a fighter. She was a legend, a war icon, and the undisputed ruler of this pit of death. Lucas hadn't even meant to fight. It all started with a stupid misunderstanding at the tavern. He'd gotten into an argument with a local Korean thug, a lizard fish. He'd put him down fast. A quick reversal, a shattered arm, and the guy was whimpering on the floor. Normally, that would have been the end of it, but this planet didn't operate on normal rules. The fight had been witnessed not just by the bar's regular scumbags, but by a talent scout for the arena, a reptilian promoter who saw an opportunity. Before Lucas could even protest, he was registered as a fighter, shoved into the tournament under some obscure local law, and sent straight into the final match. Now he was here, weaponless, shirt stripped from his back, standing in the center of a blood-stained battlefield where countless warriors had met their end. The sand beneath his feet was slick with old fights, the stench of sweat and metal thick in the air. A drumbeat thundered overhead, deep, rhythmic, primal, as if the planet itself was pounding in anticipation of the violence to come. Across from him, Tessara lifted her massive arms, rolling her shoulders with a grin that sent a shiver down his spine. She was enjoying this. Human, her voice rumbled like distant thunder, amused yet predatory. I thought they'd send me a real challenge tonight. Lucas exhaled through his nose, shaking out his arms, mind racing for a plan. He couldn't match her strength. That much was obvious. If she grabbed him, it was over. If she landed a single clean hit, it was over. But if he could outthink her, if he could use her own momentum against her, maybe, just maybe, he could survive. The gong rang. Tessara moved first, charging with terrifying speed, her colossal frame deceivingly fast. Lucas barely sidestepped in time, rolling to the left as her fist struck the ground with enough force to send sand flying in all directions. The crowd roared, sensing blood already. She pivoted instantly, swinging a massive leg, but Lucas ducked, feeling the air shift above him as her shin narrowly missed taking his head off. He had fought enhanced soldiers before, combat-trained cyborgs, even road mechs, but nothing compared to this. She was raw power. Lucas didn't wait. He darted forward, aiming low, slamming an elbow into the side of her knee before rolling back out of her reach. The impact barely phased her, but he saw it. A flicker of acknowledgement, the realization that he wasn't just another fool tossed into the ring to entertain the masses. Tessara grinned, eyes gleaming with something almost like approval. Not bad, little warrior, she mused, stepping forward again. This time she was slower, more measured, testing him, forcing him to commit. Lucas clenched his jaw, knowing he couldn't afford to be on the defensive forever. He needed to dictate the pace before she figured him out completely. He faked left, forcing her to shift her weight, then lunged right, launching himself upward, grabbing onto her arm as she swung, using her own momentum. He twisted midair, leveraging his smaller size to wrap around her neck, locking in a rear choke hold before she could shake him off. The crowd gasped. This was something new. Lucas squeezed with everything he had, arms tightening around the thick column of muscle, using his legs to anchor himself against her back. Tessara staggered, caught off guard, but she didn't panic. Instead, she laughed, a deep, throaty sound that sent a fresh surge of adrenaline through Lucas' body. Clever, she growled, reaching up, grabbing his torso in an iron grip, and hurling him forward like a rag doll. He barely had time to brace before he slammed into the sand, the force knocking the wind from his lungs. He rolled, coughing, blinking away the stars in his vision. Tessara loomed above him, but she wasn't attacking. She was waiting. Get up, she ordered, arms crossed. You fight with more than just strength. I like that. Lucas groaned, pushing himself to his feet. His ribs ached. His breath came in ragged gasps, but he wasn't done yet. He had learned something critical. She wasn't just fighting to win. She was fighting to test him. He didn't hesitate. He rushed in again, dodging, weaving, using every ounce of his combat training to stay ahead of her strikes, each movement pushing her closer to the edge of balance. He baited her, forced her to commit to a lunge, and at the last second, he sidestepped and drove his entire weight into the back of her knee. This time she dropped. Lucas didn't give her a chance to recover. He was on her instantly, wrapping an arm around her throat again, locking his legs around her waist like a python. He squeezed, forcing her into a submission hold, cutting off her airflow just enough to make it clear he had won. The crowd fell into stunned silence. Tessara tapped his arm once, a signal of acknowledgement. Lucas released her immediately, stumbling back as the reality of what had just happened hit him. He had defeated the reigning Gladiatrix champion of Core 5. The Colosseum exploded into cheers, boos, and chaotic shouting, but Lucas barely heard any of it because Tessara was rising to her feet, slow and deliberate, grinning at him like a predator who had just found its equal. She licked her lips, her sharp canines flashing in the artificial lights. "You have proven yourself, human," she murmured, stepping closer until he had to tilt his head back to meet her gaze. "Now we will create strong warriors together." Lucas's stomach dropped. What? Lucas had been in plenty of tough spots before, captured by rogue mercenaries, stranded on hostile planets, hunted by bounty hunters who thought they could cash in on his head. But this was new. He stood in the middle of the blood-soaked Colosseum, his body aching from the brutal fight, lungs still burning as he tried to catch his breath. Around him, the crowd roared, their voices a chaotic mix of celebration and outrage, but none of it mattered. Not when Tessara, the 13-foot-tall battle-scared gladiatrix, stood towering over him, grinning like she had just won the real fight despite her loss. Her glowing scars pulsed faintly under the arena lights, her deep crimson skin slick with sweat, muscles coiled like she was still waiting for him to make the next move. But her words were still ringing in his head, sinking in like a slow-moving poison. "Now we will create strong warriors together." Lucas forced himself to stay still, schooling his expression, even as his instincts screamed at him to find an exit. The way she said it wasn't a joke. It wasn't playful teasing. It was a declaration, a certainty, as if she had just announced the sky was blue or that gravity existed. To her, this was the next step, the natural conclusion of what had just happened in the ring. He had bested her, proven himself as a worthy warrior, and in the traditions of her people, that meant he was now her mate. Hell, before he could respond, before he could even begin to process what the actual consequences of this were, a booming voice cut through the noise. "By the laws of the Colosseum, the match is settled." The announcer, a thick-limbed reptilian with a voice like grinding stone, raised his many arms, silencing the uproar from the spectators. "A new champion stands victorious, and the challenge has been accepted." The challenge? Lucas's stomach twisted. He had heard stories about the warrior clans of Core 5, but he hadn't paid much attention. Their traditions were their own business. He hadn't expected to be dragged into them. He glanced around, scanning for an escape route, but before he could take a step, Tessara's massive hand closed around his forearm. Not in an aggressive way, not like she was capturing him. It was possessive, claiming, "You will come with me," she said, her voice laced with certainty, as if it was already decided. The rites must be completed. Lucas clenched his jaw. The rites? That sounded bad. "I'm flattered," he said, keeping his tone neutral, trying to find an angle. "But I don't exactly remember agreeing to this." Tessara's grin didn't waver, but something sharpened in her eyes. "You fought me, human. You won. That is the agreement. Strength recognizes strength." Lucas had to remind himself that arguing wouldn't get him anywhere. This wasn't about romance. It wasn't about emotions or feelings. It was law, tradition. Tessara wasn't trying to woo him. She was honoring a system that had existed longer than he had been alive. To her, this wasn't a demand. It was a fact. The crowd began to chant, some in approval, others in disbelief. "Breed the champion. Breed the champion." Lucas swore under his breath. Nope. Nope. Absolutely not. He pulled his arm back, stepping away, ignoring the way the entire arena sensed the shift in energy. The last thing he needed was to make this worse. "Look, Tessara, I respect you. You're a damn impressive fighter, but I'm not part of this whole thing. I didn't come here to get tangled in your traditions. I was thrown into the fight by accident, and now I'm leaving." Silence. A dangerous kind of silence. Tessara's expression didn't change, but the air between them grew heavier. The amusement in her gaze flickered, replaced by something colder, not anger, disappointment, like she had expected better from him. "You would walk away from this?" she asked, tilting her head slightly, her voice having lost its teasing edge. "You would shame me before my people?" Lucas tensed. Shame. That was the word that sent an uneasy shiver down his spine, because suddenly this wasn't just about him anymore. It wasn't just some ridiculous misunderstanding he could walk away from. If he rejected her, if he publicly refused, it wouldn't just be a personal insult. It would be a disgrace to her entire legacy as a warrior. Lucas had seen how warriors like her operated. Honor wasn't just some abstract concept, it was their foundation. And right now, in front of thousands of watching eyes, he was about to step on it. Tessara let out a slow exhale, her fingers flexing at her sides. "You misunderstand," she said, voice steady. "You think this is a cage. It is not. It is an honor." Lucas ran a hand through his sweat-dampened hair, frustration creeping into his tone. "Honor doesn't mean much to a dead man, and from what I've gathered, your people don't exactly take rejection lightly." Tessara's lips twitched. "You're not wrong." Lucas didn't like that answer. He scanned the arena again, looking for a way out, a solution, anything that wouldn't end in either his execution or an interspecies wedding. The only ally he had was the fight promoter, the same reptilian bastard who had tricked him into this mess in the first place. The guy was lingering near the edge of the pit, counting credits, clearly thrilled by the spectacle. If Lucas could just get close enough, offer him a deal, bribe him, something. Tessara shifted, watching him carefully. "You are looking for a way to escape." Lucas wasn't about to lie. "Yeah, can you blame me?" Tessara hummed, tilting her head as if considering something. Then, to his surprise, she took a step back, crossing her arms over her chest. "I will give you a chance," she said. "Run, if you wish. Leave the Colosseum, leave this city. If you can escape me, then I will release you from this obligation. But if I catch you..." Lucas already knew what came next. His pulse kicked up. A hunt. She was giving him a sporting chance, a calculated risk. If she truly saw him as worthy, she wouldn't just claim him. She would chase him, prove that she deserved him. Lucas let out a slow breath, rolling his shoulders. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. "You've got a deal." Tessara grinned, fangs flashing. "Run well, human. I enjoy the chase." And just like that, the game began. Lucas didn't waste time thinking. He ran, his boots digging into the sand as he bolted toward the Colosseum's outer walls, weaving through the chaos of the bloodthirsty crowd. His muscles were already burning from the fight. The roars of the spectators blurred into white noise, but he could still hear her. Tessara, standing tall in the center of the arena, watching him with a smirk, letting him make his move first. She wanted to hunt him, not capture him too easily. That meant he had seconds, maybe a full minute at best, before she decided to give chase. His brain was working faster than his legs. Where could he go? How far could he get before she inevitably caught up? He had no weapons, no supplies, nothing except the sweat on his back and whatever sheer dumb luck had kept him alive this long. Core 5 was a war world, a gladiator planet, which meant the cities weren't like the polished metropolises of the galactic core. This place was brutal, built for strength, not comfort. Outside the Colosseum lay a labyrinth of alleyways, abandoned buildings, rusting war vehicles, and a sprawling desert beyond the city limits that could just as easily kill him as save him. If he could make it to the slums, find passage off-world, or at least some place where a giant alien warrior couldn't easily track him, he had a shot. He hit the arena gates at full speed, shoving past armored guards who barely lifted a hand to stop him. They were laughing. To them, this wasn't an escape attempt, it was entertainment. As far as they were concerned, he was already caught, and the chase was just part of the show. He ignored their jeering and barreled through a side passage, emerging into the industrial underbelly of the city, where rusted pipes hissed steam into the air, and the stench of oil mixed with something far less pleasant. Lucas took the first turn he saw, then another, keeping his body low, his breathing steady, trying to move like a soldier again, silent, quick, unpredictable. He wasn't just running, he was thinking. Tessara was bigger, stronger, and had far more stamina than him. If this turned into a straight endurance test, she'd win. If he climbed, she'd just rip through obstacles. If he tried to hide, she'd track him down with ease. He had no doubt her species had senses that far outmatched his own. That meant he had one real option. outmaneuver her. His first goal was finding higher ground, not because she couldn't reach him, but because he needed options, needed to be able to see her coming and force her into tighter, more confined areas where her size became a disadvantage. He spotted a half-collapsed building up ahead, the remnants of some old war factory, its metal scaffolding still intact despite the decades of decay. He sprinted toward it, his legs protesting as he leaped onto a broken support beam, scrambling his way up the structure, using rusted pipes and twisted metal as makeshift handholds. He was halfway up when he heard it, her footsteps. Not heavy, not clumsy. Calculated, measured. She wasn't rushing. She was pacing herself. Lucas climbed faster, forcing himself onto the highest platform, breathing hard as he looked back. There she was. Tessara stood at the base of the ruined factory, tilting her head slightly as she studied him. Her massive frame was perfectly still, only her long fingers flexing at her sides. She wasn't even sweating. Interesting choice, she called up to him, her voice carrying easily through the steel wreckage. You climb thinking I will follow, assume height grants you an advantage. But that only works if I play by your rules. Before Lucas could react, she grabbed the support beam he had just climbed and yanked. Metal screeched, bolts snapped, and suddenly the entire structure lurched beneath him. Lucas swore, shifting his weight as the tower of rust and steel groaned, its weakened frame unable to withstand the sheer force of her grip. She wasn't climbing. She was bringing the whole damn thing down. He had no choice. He jumped. The platform beneath him collapsed a second later, twisting into itself as it crashed into the lower levels, sending debris and dust exploding outward. Lucas hit the next rooftop hard, rolling to absorb the impact, his ribs screaming in protest as he forced himself up. Tessara didn't give him a second to recover. She was already moving, her powerful legs carrying her forward in massive strides, closing the distance far too quickly. Lucas bolted again, sprinting across the rooftop, leaping to the next building, barely clearing the gap. His boots skidded against loose gravel as he stumbled into a rundown market district, where neon signs flickered weakly over rows of half-abandoned stalls. The city was alive with lowlifes and mercenaries, some watching with amused curiosity, others not caring at all. He shoved past them, darting between makeshift buildings, trying to lose her in the chaos, but Tessara wasn't slowing down. He could feel her presence behind him, a force of nature, relentless and unwavering. She wasn't even winded. If anything, she was enjoying this. Lucas made a sharp left, slipping into a narrow alleyway, banking on the tight space, forcing her to slow down. He pressed his back against the wall, breathing hard, listening. Silence. For a second, he thought he'd done it, that maybe, just maybe, she had lost sight of him. Then he heard the grinding of metal. Lucas turned just in time to see Tessara stepping through the opposite wall like it was made of paper. She had just walked through a building to get to him. The smirk on her face was downright predatory now, her golden eyes gleaming in the dim light. You run well, she admitted, stepping closer, her sheer size making the alley feel even smaller. Most would have given up by now. Lucas pushed off the wall, keeping his stance loose, ready to move. Most aren't me. Tessara let out a slow, satisfied hum. You think fast, you fight well, and you understand when to retreat. She stepped forward again, forcing him to back up against the opposite wall. But you misunderstand one thing, human. Lucas clenched his jaw, eyes darting for an exit. Tessara reached out, her massive hand pressing against his chest, pinning him in place without even trying. This was never about whether you could escape, she murmured, lowering her face until their eyes met directly. This was about whether you were worth chasing. Lucas's breath caught. Tessara's smirk widened. And you are. She leaned in slightly, her voice a low, amused purr. So tell me, human, will you continue to run, or will you fight for what is already yours? Lucas stared up at Tessara, his breathing still uneven from the chase, his back pressed against the cold wall of the narrow alley. He could feel the weight of her hand on his chest. Not crushing, not forcing, just holding, not like he was prey, not like he was captured, but like she had already decided this was inevitable. Her golden eyes gleamed in the dim light, sharp with amusement, but carrying something deeper beneath the surface, something unreadable. The way she had spoken, the way she had said he was worth chasing, it wasn't just a taunt, she meant it. Lucas could still hear the distant murmur of the city around them, the flickering neon casting faint glows along the rusted walls, the low hum of passing vehicles overhead. Somewhere, the Colosseum's crowd was still roaring, the spectacle of his escape only adding fuel to the ever-burning fire of Core 5's gladiator culture. This planet thrived on blood, on strength, on warriors proving themselves in ways outsiders like him barely understood. He had spent his life in battles of his own, fought in wars that had long since ended, taken jobs that blurred the lines between survival and morality. He had learned how to escape, how to adapt, how to survive. But now, staring into the unwavering confidence in Tessara's gaze, he realized he had been thinking about this all wrong. She wasn't treating him like a prize. She was giving him a choice. His pulse steadied, his mind clearing as he shifted his stance just enough to test her reaction. She didn't tighten her grip. If he wanted to move, she would let him. If he wanted to run, she wouldn't stop him. But if he stayed, that meant something. "You expect me to just accept this?" Lucas finally spoke, his voice even despite the lingering fire in his lungs from the chase. "That I should just roll over and let tradition decide my future?" Tessara's smirk didn't fade. "Tradition is the foundation of strength," she said, tilting her head slightly. "But you are not a man who follows rules, are you?" Lucas huffed, finally lifting his hand to press against hers. Not to remove it, but to push back just enough to show he wasn't broken, wasn't submitting, wasn't backing down. Not particularly. Her fingers curled slightly against his chest, a slow, deliberate movement, like she was feeling the heartbeat beneath, taking in the way he stood firm despite the odds against him. "Good," she murmured. "I would not want you if you were weak." The weight of those words settled between them, unspoken but undeniable. She was still watching him like she was waiting for something, but for the first time since this entire mess started, Lucas felt the shift in control. He could walk away right now. No one would stop him. Tessara would let him go. But she wanted him to choose otherwise. Lucas exhaled slowly, his mind running through the possibilities. If he ran, she would honor her word, and he would be free. But what then? Back to bouncing from system to system, taking jobs that led nowhere, fighting battles that didn't matter. What if this planet, this challenge, was something worth considering? He wasn't some helpless fool trapped in an alien tradition. He was a soldier, a survivor, a fighter. And right now, he had a warrior queen standing in front of him, waiting to see if he was bold enough to fight for something more than just himself. He let out a dry chuckle, shaking his head slightly. "You really don't take rejection well, do you?" Tessara's grin widened. "I have never been rejected, and you are not about to be the first." Lucas pushed harder against her hand, forcing her to finally step back, giving him the space he demanded, not because he needed to escape, but because he needed to face her on equal footing. He rolled his shoulders, the aches from the fight and the chase still lingering. But they barely registered now. The weight of the situation had changed. "You want me to fight for this?" he asked, locking eyes with her. "Then tell me, what exactly am I fighting for?" Tessara's expression shifted, subtle but enough that he caught it. Not surprise, not amusement, something far more personal. "For the right to stand beside me," she said, her voice low but steady. "Not as a conquest, not as a trophy, as an equal." The words hit harder than Lucas expected. She wasn't claiming him. She was offering him a place beside her. And not just because of tradition, not just because he had beaten her in a fight, but because she saw something in him worth standing with. He let that sink in for a long moment. The silence stretched between them, tension still thick, but now it was different. A choice. Lucas inhaled, rolling his neck, considering everything, the fight, the chase, the offer. And then, finally, he smirked. "You're going to have to work harder than that to convince me," he said, voice laced with challenge. Tessara chuckled, crossing her arms, the glow of her battle scars pooling faintly in the neon light. "Good. I enjoy a long war." Lucas exhaled, shaking his head. "I must be losing my mind," he muttered. Tessara tilted her head, watching him expectantly. "Does that mean you accept?" He didn't answer right away. He just turned, stepping out of the alley and back into the streets, his pace steady, his mind made up. If she wanted a fight, he'd give her one, but it would be on his terms. Tessara followed, a satisfied smirk on her lips. The hunt was over, but the battle had just begun. Lucas didn't know what the hell he was doing. Every instinct screamed at him that this was a mistake, that he should have run the second Tessara had given him the chance, disappeared into the chaotic streets of Core 5, found a ship and gotten the hell off this war-ridden planet. That would have been the smart thing to do, the safe thing, the obvious thing. But instead, he was walking beside her, matching her long, powerful strides as they moved through the streets, drawing every damn pair of eyes in the district. He could feel them, the stares, The whispered conversations as people recognized the Colosseum's champion walking beside the human who had bested her. They didn't understand it. They expected her to have dragged him back, bound in chains, kicking and screaming like some captured prize. They expected a victor and a conquered, not two warriors walking side by side. Tessara wasn't saying much. She didn't need to. Every movement, every glance, every calculated turn of her head spoke volumes. She was aware of the attention, of the way people's gazes flickered between her and Lucas. How some looked on in approval while others whispered in disgust. The old warriors, the ones who still followed tradition, they were intrigued. The younger ones, the ones eager to break away from the ways of the past, were less impressed. Lucas caught a few of them watching him with narrowed eyes, hands resting on weapons, their postures rigid with barely contained resentment. This wasn't just about him and Tessara anymore. This was about what he represented, a human, an outsider stepping into something sacred to their people. It didn't matter that he had won the fight. It didn't matter that Tessara had chosen to honor that victory. Some would never accept it, and Lucas knew damn well that the moment Tessara turned her back, some of these warriors would love nothing more than to put a blade through his ribs, just to prove a point. Tessara was watching them too. He could tell by the way her shoulders tensed ever so slightly, by the way her golden eyes flicked toward the few braver souls who didn't bother hiding their open disdain. She didn't say anything, didn't call them out, didn't challenge them. She didn't need to. Her presence alone was a warning. Lucas had to admit it was impressive. He had met plenty of leaders, plenty of hardened soldiers who commanded loyalty and fear, but Tessara, she had absolute control over this space, not because she forced it, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it. And yet, despite all that, despite everything she had built, she had chosen to bring him into this. Maybe that's what made him hesitate, because if she was willing to do that, then she had to believe he was worth the risk. They'd moved deeper into the heart of the city, away from the neon-lit slums and into a sector that looked far older, far more fortified. The architecture changed, shifting from rusted-out war remnants to massive stone structures, their walls adorned with Corian glyphs, their entrances guarded by warriors in armor that looked far more ceremonial than practical. Lucas felt the weight of history pressing down around him. This wasn't just another district. This was where the warlords ruled. Tessara didn't break stride. She led him straight through the towering gates, where more guards watched them pass with the same mix of curiosity and doubt. Lucas could feel it in the air, the way their presence was shifting something, shaking long-standing traditions to their core. Tessara had just done something no champion had ever done before, brought an outsider into the halls of power as her equal. The main chamber was massive, carved directly into the rock. The high ceilings were lined with banners from past warriors, their names etched into stone, their victories immortalized in the very bones of the city. A massive circular platform stood at the center, surrounded by raised seating where warriors and elders had already gathered, some watching with keen interest, others with thinly veiled contempt. At the head of it all, a throne sat beneath a towering set of blade-shaped pillars, and upon it an older Corian warlord sat in silence, his massive form draped in a cloak made from the hide of some long-extinct beast. His eyes, a deeper shade of gold than Tessara's, locked onto her immediately, then flickered toward Lucas, studying him with the kind of weight that made lesser men crumble. Lucas didn't crumble. He kept his stance even, his expression neutral, knowing damn well that every movement, every breath was being evaluated. Tessara stepped forward, placing a fist over her chest in formal salute. "I bring my claim before the council," she said, voice steady, unwavering. "By the laws of strength, by the rights of challenge, I name this human as worthy." A heavy silence followed. Then the warlord exhaled through his nose, leaning forward slightly, his massive hands gripping the edges of his throne. "A human?" he repeated, voice rough, aged, filled with disapproval. "You bring an outsider into our halls and expect us to accept this." "He defeated me in the arena," Tessara answered without hesitation. "That is the law. That is our way." "The law," the warlord mused, running a clawed hand over his jaw. "And yet our traditions were built on warriors of our blood, not fragile creatures who scurry through the stars, hiding behind machines." Lucas didn't react, though he sure as hell wanted to. Tessara, however, didn't give the warlord a chance to continue. "If our strength is decided by blood alone, then we have already lost," she said, her voice sharper now, cutting through the tension like a blade. "Strength is not inherited. It is proven. He proved his. I will not dishonor that." Lucas could feel the weight of those words ripple through the room. Some of the warriors stirred, their postures shifting, some intrigued, others frustrated. The warlord let out a slow, considering breath. You would stake your honor on this? Tessara didn't blink. I would stake my life. Lucas felt something tighten in his chest at that. This wasn't just a declaration. This was a battle, and Tessara was fighting for him. The warlord studied her for a long moment before finally leaning back, his gaze settling on Lucas once more. Then let us see if he is worthy, he rumbled. The tension in the chamber shifted, and Lucas knew whatever came next wasn't going to be another fight in the sand. This was going to be far worse. Lucas stood in the center of the chamber, every muscle tense, every instinct on edge as the weight of 100 eyes bore down on him. He had been in war rooms before, in battle briefings where commanders planned their next offensive, in situations where a single wrong move could mean death. But this was something else. This was a test he hadn't prepared for, and the worst part, he didn't even know the damn rules. The warlord's gaze stayed locked on him, cold and calculating, his golden eyes assessing everything. The way Lucas stood, the way he breathed, the way he didn't flinch despite the obvious hostility in the room. Lucas knew the warlord wasn't just considering his strength, wasn't just debating if he was worth honoring Tessara's claim. He was looking for weakness, for any excuse to strike him down right here in front of everyone. Tessara stood at his side, not close enough to interfere, but close enough to be a presence, to remind them all that she had made her choice, and she wasn't backing down. Lucas had expected her to argue more, to fight harder, but now he realized this was his fight. She had done what she could. The rest was up to him. The warlord's fingers tapped against the armrest of his throne, slow and deliberate. You claim this human has proven himself, he said, voice like grinding stone. You believe he is worthy, but strength is more than skill in battle. Tessara didn't move, didn't blink. I know. The warlord's eyes flicked to Lucas. Then let us see if he does. A low murmur rippled through the chamber, warriors shifting in their seats, anticipation building like a storm on the horizon. Lucas remained still, waiting, watching, already.